There was a point in the history of Europe when peasants and slaves did not own any property. Shocking. That all of the harvest that farmers made went directly to their landlords, and all of the profit that they made was no profit because it went directly to their landlords. There was a mysterious debt that was put upon these people that was never specified, and the Tsars and the emperors of nations kept this debt going. This created a conflict between the rich and the poor of any sort of nation, but more particularly in Russia. I've studied Russian history throughout my high school career, and I'm currently working on a minor in Russian area studies and a history minor. And what really fascinates me is the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution changed politics and history forever. It changed a new way of looking into politics, and it changed the way that we interpret Russia to this day. So today I'd like to go over the causes, the key events, and the results of the Russian Revolution. So first of all, I'd like to talk about this man. This is Tsar Nicholas II. He was the king/emperor of Russia, and he was also not the smartest of fellows. So his father was Alexander III. Alexander III was known as the great liberator of Russia. He worked very hard at getting rid of this unknown debt for slaves and serfs, and freeing them and creating their own markets. But Tsar Nicholas, on the other hand, had other ideas. According to Harris of the Smithsonian Magazine in 2016, in his first speech to Parliament, Tsar Nicholas II said he had no interest in working with the serfs, and actually wanted to work with the nobility instead, and wanted to create a bigger debt for them. But second of all, he brought this man as his key advisor. This is Rasputin. Now, if you don't know Rasputin, he's a pretty funny guy. He was a party, a drunkard, and a clergyman all at the same time. And it was believed that he had magical healing powers. So Tsar Nicholas II was very fond of him and brought him in to be his #1 advisor. Now, if you're a peasant, how do you feel about this man being the one that's helping making the decisions around your property? You're probably not a big fan of it. And lastly, there was this event called World War I. Don't know if you all have ever heard of it, but Russia was heavily involved in it. And a senior lecturer at Eastern Michigan University, Walter G. Moss, wrote the History of Russia, 2 volumes, and he discussed in it how the factories of Russia collapsed under the pressure of World War I, and they were not producing guns fast enough, faster than manpower. The manpower of Russia was just too great, and it was very unorganized. People were sent to the front lines and told to grab guns off of the corpses of people. Imagine having to pull the guns off of somebody you know, and that's the only way you protect yourself. So the Tsar was not in a good spot, and Russia did end up having to pull out of the war very quickly before everybody else because they took heavy losses. So now that we've analyzed the causes, I want to go into the revolution itself. So now that we've established the people aren't a big fan of the Tsar, there's this conflict between the rich and the poor. Tsar Nicholas himself actually abdicated the throne in 1918 with all of this pressure against him. Multiple lost wars, and like a lot of key failures, and especially the Rasputin issue. So with this open void, who would take the throne? Who would be the one to fill that power gap? Well, let me introduce you to our protagonist. This is Vladimir Lenin. Now, Lenin was a communist. I'm sure we're all familiar with the term of communism, but there was a conflict in the new Russian parliament between the communists, the Reds, versus the traditionalists, the Whites. This was the ones looking for change, looking to build that Marxist ideology, versus those who wanted to go back to what we originally had. They were scared of change. The ones who wanted to put a new czar in charge. Now, these two very different ideologies, of course, they did not agree on a lot of things. They weren't able to come to a compromise, which eventually led to the Russian Civil War. This is a map of it from 1918, just to kind of give you an idea. But Hyhem and Kagan wrote a book called The Military History of the Soviet Union. And they wrote that in 1918, the Red Army, or the Communist Army, was made up of over 500,000 urban workers alone. So that was the main argument, or main audience was urban workers, since they were the ones that were argued to be exploited by the rich. Those were the ones whose property was being stolen, and those were the ones who were constantly being embarrassed by the higher class. So the soldier deaths in this war was estimated to be about 1 million, according to them. But the main casualties came from civilians through the destruction of property and all of the land that was used throughout this world, the food that was consumed. Soldiers would just go onto land and just steal your food, and that was it. You couldn't do anything about it because there was no government. So the civilian deaths actually estimated to be about 7 to 8 million between famine, disease, and other things. And the White Army lost due to a lack of support and the idea that how are we going to pick a new czar? It was very confusing to everybody. So Walter G. Moss connects that after the war, there was a huge famine, and a lot of people died from it beyond that, and just diseases in general, and the destruction of property. So Lenin had to come up with the new economic policy, or the NEP, which actually allowed for the privatization of grain business, which was huge because it wasn't communist. It's a very anti-communist policy. It's very capitalist. And that ended up helping out a lot. But soon after, he died. Lenin died just 2 years after the war, and Stalin took control. Stalin's version of communism was very different from Lenin's version of communism. Lenin's version of communism focused on a rich versus poor dynamic, while Stalin's dynamic focused on more of a communist versus non-communist party members' ideology. In a journal by Bocci, he estimated that the Soviet Union or Russia would have a population of 21% larger than what they would today because of the fact that they fought in two world wars and a civil war back to back. The Soviet Union generated a new economic ideas in the thoughts of nations and was the first communist nation of the world due to this revolution. And Marquette University studies argued that it wasn't exactly communism that failed, but it was more power-hungry, rich individuals who wanted to consume power that caused it to fail. And finally, I'd like to talk about how today we kind of see something similar. We have someone who is a part of the Soviet Union in charge of Russia today. And similarly to how Lenin and Stalin forced others to have to work underneath him, we have to work in Putin's rules. Instead of him working with us and us collaborating, we are forced to change for him. Thank you.